Dear colleagues, my name is Danica Stojiljković.
It's
I'm
working.
coming from the Institute for Multidisciplinary Research, University of Belgrade. I'm sorry that I'm not today with you. With support of the organizers, I have prepared this presentation for you. The title of my study is The Concept of Synthesis in Yugoslav Socialist Society, Synthurbanism of Vjenceslav Richter. This study addressed the concept of synthesis in Yugoslav architecture. The avant-garde inclinations in socio-political and cultural milieu of Yugoslav socialism postulated the concept of synthesis as a central theme in architecture and visual arts. The aim of this study is to describe a broader context of synthetic thought in Yugoslav society through the architectural and urbanistic ideas of architect Vjenceslav Richter. In the early 1960s, Richter used experimental models to explore spatial plastic relations, which led to the development of the concept that provided synthetic solutions for urban functions, Synthurbanism. Richter's theory of the organization of living synthesis was rooted in the key concept of socialist society, harmonious relations between individuals and the collective, and the human as an integrated biological and social being. The premise of this study is that the original ideological agenda of Yugoslav socialism, based on the values of Marxist humanism, provided comprehensive social and philosophical context for the concept of synthesis. The idea of synthesis and integrative theory of space are associated with the concept of organic architecture that emerged in the late 19th century in relation to ecological issues. In addition to technological utopia, the first half of 20th century saw the expansion of natural philosophy in architecture, which is evident in the concept of organic architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright. The organic architecture is presented as synthesis, the unity and harmony between human and environment. In the early 1950s, the return to the source of synthesis, which was aimed at humanization of urban space, became a common process in progressive societies. Walter Gropius paved the route for new integrative experiment of living in his work Scope of Total Architecture, published in 1956, that underlined the importance of the analysis of living urban organisms in restoring human merits to the city. The importance of this book for Yugoslav society is implicated by the fact that it received Yugoslav edition in 1961 entitled Synthesis in Architecture. The concept of synthesis was of particular importance for Yugoslav society that recognized synthesis as one of the key ideological and political postulates which developed from humanistic orientation of the self-managing socialism. An authentic foundation of Yugoslav socio-political project was based on humanistic interpretation of the teachings of Marx and Engels and advocated the synthesis of philosophy of science, art and society. Avant-garde Yugoslav ideologist and the key figure in the democratization of culture postulated in 1954 that cultural creatorship has to be organically connected to great socialist efforts of the working people. Marxist dialectics provided analogy and method for analysis of developmental processes in nature that could be used to explain across the board interconnections. The importance of interdisciplinary approach was implicated by a series of symposia on theme of synthesis that brought together a large number of Yugoslav intellectuals, including architects. It was postulated that the idea of synthesis requires interconnection and collaboration of educational system, culture workers, institutions, urban planning, architectural design, art, and also humanistic, biological, and environmental sciences with the goal to establish urban spatial development that is in in accord with the values of humanistic Marxism. Architect Alexei Brkic on the Second Symposium of Synthesis put forward broad philosophical foundation of synthesis. This is why synthesis is not only nature's nature, but also the nature of human existence. It is only in the establishment of relations and order and in reconciliation that one can find the real human sense and human abilities, just like the true sense of human creation can only be revealed in art. And exactly for this purpose, the law of synthesis in its essence and its final character ultimately became the law of beauty. It was humanistic Marxism that stood at very core of the interpretation of the synthesis of numerous Yugoslav architects. Architect Vjenceslav Richter was probably the most persistent in the development of the concept of synthesis among Yugoslav architects, proposing a global, holistic, and systematic approach. As a member of avant-garde group Exit 51, he presented the manifesto of the group in 1954 in his publication, The Prognosis of Life and Art Synthesis as a Reflection of Our Time. The manifesto offered, from the point of artistic synthesis, Richter considered architecture as modulation of spatial shaping that requires a sense for the whole, truth, and within which components and details can only acquire true meaning. Richter applied the exploration of new spatial principles in the project of Yugoslav Pavilion at the Triennale in Milan in 1963. He used wooden slat as a structural unit that was repeated and freely arranged in the space. Through analysis of spatial mass, he showed that visual environment can be shaped by simply means through dynamic alternation of spatial intervals, which results in synthetic ambient. Richter developed his theory using experiments that searched for principles and rules of organization of elements of plastic objects through identification of interdependencies of activities of an individual within the whole. The experiments in the project Reliefometer from 1964 investigated systematic structures that contain a large number of monoelements. The structures were developed using a systematic approach and allowed translation of all monoelements to create a dynamic membrane. The model of Reliefometer enabled Richter to create postulates of methodology and to develop a systematic intellectual process. Richter recognized an important stimulus for the development of architectural space in his plastic spatial structures that manifest the concept of layered, unstable, and changeable space. Although Richter initially built the concept of synthesis on the basis of synthesis in art, the concept extended to living environment with the aim to make them more human and in accord with human merits. Starting from the transformation of structure of society, Richter developed in 1964 the concept of organization and shaping of new polyfunctional urban environment of a socialist city through the utopian model of synthesis urbanism, Synthurbanism. In the concept of ambient structure of future cities, Richter considered requirements and potentials of construction of megastructural architectural volumes that should enable the fulfillment of objectives of socialist society. The city with million residents was composed of 100 synthurbanistic units. Each unit, ziggurat, is a separate complex that autonomously enabled and integrated the main living functions such as production, housing, recreation for 10,000 people. Richter criticized Le Corbusier's urbanism that showed distinctly separated functions of the city and did not take into account the loss of time. Attention to this, Richter tried to develop an urbanistic concept that would enable rational use of time through synthesis of function of living. In design, Richter starts from the principle that the residential unit is infinitely small, which enables free shaping. Richter pointed out that the object with multiply complex functions for a large number of consumers defines the relation of elements with the whole. Architectural object is large if the basic structural or spatial element is infinitely small. This is achieved in an object with dimension of 300 by 300 by 150 meters, which is optimal for 10,000 residents. The basic unit of Synthurbanism, ziggurat, has pyramidal shape. Similar urbanistic architectural projects of pyramidal forms have been developed in Western Europe during that period, such as project of French architects Pierre Parat and Michel Audreau. Richter's systematic architecture shows visual resemblance with those projects, but has different relations between functions. The unit ziggurat is designed as a small city that enables high efficiency of living and promotes the sense of responsibility and belonging to the collective. In this way, Richter wanted to actualize self-management as real and palpable political function of living space. The hall, which is called Assembleia for 6,000 people, represents the instrument of administration where all decisions are made by referendum. Richter proposed to place the production within ziggurat and to apply alternative methods for creating healthy urban environments such as waste processing and filtration. He considered the common zonal distribution of industry and housing to be inefficient and unsustainable. Synthurbanistic city enables realization of integral economic interests such as financial, technical, and production-related, also organizational interests such as economy of time, transport connections, and integration of functions of living, and ideological interests such as awareness of collective management of complex functions, positivistic philosophical perspective of life, and artistic expression of new socialist contexts. In the mid-1960s, Yugoslav intellectuals offered critiques of functionalist architecture that were promoted the concept of humanistic synthesis of life. This approach called for integration of ideas, programs, and productions of all designers and builders that are involved. Vjenceslav Richter addressed the concept of synthesis, searching for a model of city that will enable ideal function of urban life of self-managing social society. The main result is the concept of synthurbanistic city that unifies various functions of living such as social, economic, cultural, artistic, ecological, and urban planning. The presented utopian model showed premise that the environment represents a system of intertwined functions and that living space and humans are integrated in interactive processes which show fully functional correlativeness in achieving sustainable urban living. Although Richter's idea remained just a utopian model, a new perception of his concept is very important from the point of current aspiration of sustainable development. Synthurbanism offered ideas that address transport, pollution, fragmentation of time, and renewable energy, which represent the most important global themes of contemporary urbanism and architecture. Thank you for your attention. I hope we will meet on next conference.